Time grief we go, gotta learn to let it go. Once asleep, now awake, feeling every breath you take.
Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alix and David Long, where we talk about living consciously and helping people uncover their essential selves so that they can stop sleepwalking through life. Our goal is to create a safe space where our guests can share how they've decided to wake the F up and become mindfulness experts through their own emotional healing journey. Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast. I am Alix Long, your host, and this is my co-host, my husband, David Long. Welcome back.
Hello.
We are flowing through what we're calling Man Month, and we're so excited to be back and talking about all things men. So,
I think we pretty much covered everything last time.
I recognize after listening to last week's episode,
The most simplistic emotional creatures in the world.
yeah, there's so much to say, and sometimes I have to laugh at myself. For those of you who are following us on a week-to-week basis, you either have to laugh or you have to cry. I'm not sure which one you do, but sometimes you get feedback, and when there's a lot to say and you're super passionate about something, and talking about men and men feeling is almost it's almost more crucial than me speaking about women. And my demographic tends to be women, and I am a woman, and I've been working with women for over a decade. And so therefore, I know women well, and I know how to reach them. But women suffer because of the gap and the loneliness that we put between ourselves and our men, whether that be our family members, our friends, or our partners. And I get very impassioned to speak about men and to make sure when we come into these podcasts, I've over-prepared, if anything, and there's just so much information to talk about. And so, it's kind of funny when you have to criticize your own self. We listened to it and we knew last episode it just didn't land very well for me. I'm sure it didn't land for any of you either. So if you turned it off, we also wanted to turn it off, and that's okay.
I thought it was fine.
But that happens sometimes. I mean, we're novice podcasters who love emotional topics, and we're super passionate, and I know that I'm super passionate about men. I think it's important because although I know women are listening to our podcast is the higher percentage, they're making their husbands listen to it as well. And we have gotten so many listeners that have reached out about questions about their husbands, and their husbands are following along, and it's changed their marriage, and it's changed the way they're approaching communication in their marriage. So I'd like to just laugh and apologize that I got a little excitable last episode and interrupted David a lot. And when I interrupt, it's usually because I'm trying to hit all these points that I think are so important. So I'm going to calm down. We've had kind of a lot going on in our little pregnancy life back here.
I actually think the pregnancy
makes me a little more aggressive.
The pregnancy clock is just ticking. You're getting more uncomfortable.
Yeah,
less sleep is less regular. Everything is less regular. You're more emotional, which is okay. And
definitely. And we've
been worried. We've had a few issues.
We have a lot of issues,
we haven't
actually.
Talked about it, but mainly, our birth plan kind of got shot out of the water.
So we don't have any issues with the baby. She's perfectly healthy and doing amazing. But actually, we found out about a month ago that I have a thing called vasoprevia. It's essentially when the fetal blood vessel is blocking the opening to what will become the birth canal. Now, that sounds like not that big of a deal, but when you start to dilate and get ready to have a baby, which can happen anywhere in the third trimester, it becomes pretty serious. So this is where they think a lot of stillbirths happen. And so it's I've been a little quiet about it because it is actually something that potentially has a small chance of resolving itself. And so I don't want to disasterize or put things out there before we have full knowledge. But we've gone to the high-risk doctor 1, 2, 3 in a row, and it's looking pretty stable. What does that mean? I mean, we're rambling at this point, not about Man Month, but we can talk about how this has been challenging for our family. So what this means is I will probably be hospitalized several weeks before we deliver. I have never had a C-section. I know that many of you out there have, and it's very safe, and it's, of course, like a wonderful option for those who choose it, need it. For me, because I know natural birth, that's what I'm comfortable with. And so I'm scared to do the other way, especially being an embodied practitioner. That's a big thing. I really don't like surgery of any nature, and even when it's minimally invasive, and the best thing. So yet I trust my team, and there's just been a lot going on. And so I would say that in that, we've also rolled into Father's Day. We had one of our children graduate. We've had 3 children graduate in 2 months, and all of that came down the pipe right in the middle of that. So we had lots of family members in and out. Not a lot of time to process. But what we're looking like is we're going to be going into August with me potentially in the hospital for
a month.
The baby definitely going to potentially have a NICU stay. That's scaring me the most. As we went through an entire mother month and all the research that I did on attachment, that's been a little bit hard because I really don't want our baby to not be close to me. And I really don't want to leave my babies. So one of the things about being in this company is this is a passion project for us, and we're here to help people because we care. And we've learned a lot. We've lost so much, and we're constantly surrounded by the refraction of loss and loss fallout. And we live strong and awake and emotional and sometimes anxious and interrupty because we have a lot to say, because we're passionate about how to heal from loss. And to go into this, what I consider miracle of a baby, and this is literally like the representation of us choosing life and choosing rebirth and choosing to be unapologetically us. We have had so much, and actually it's people close to us that have been harsh on our decisions. And it's reminded me of many of the things we've done along the way. That when you have your life shattered and you're deep in loss, you no longer are the same person, and that's all I can say. No one will understand that that's not been through significant loss. They just can't get it. They need you to be the same person, but we're not. We are 2 different people who take all the things that we didn't do well, all the regrets that we have from how we could have been better spouses, parents, and we carry that in our heart every day. Next to the fact that we actually physically buried our best friends and the people that we had our children with. We rose from the ashes and created a whole entire new life. And let me just say this, that choosing love after that is really hard. You have to believe you're worthy of it. You have to go against society. You have to believe you're good enough. You have to believe even when you're not feeling good enough. You have to talk about how you feel with the person. And you have to say, I'm a widow, which is like being divorced 27,000 times. And it's like every black ball you would ever be handed is a widow. People tell you, don't get into that. Ooh, you sure you want to get into that?
Yeah, I mean, I felt some of those things you're talking about. I did not think about them near as much as you did.
I'm super empathic, so,
I felt strongly about what I had to do and what I wanted to do. And I did not really think too much about how it looked or what was right, what was wrong.
I think men are better about that.
And I felt so strongly about what I wanted that I don't think anything would have kept me from it, including you. So I was, Now, so that was a little different. I didn't intellectualize as much as you did. I really was, for the first time in my life, not intellectualizing. I had always intellectualized everything that I did to the nth degree and too much, really. I mean, I read so many books on emotions but I never felt any of them. And I never related to any of them. And then when I started really feeling, I just went with it. I never even reached for the brake pedal.
Don't you feel like, though, after the death, there's just like such a shattering that the filter isn't able to be put back in? The pleasantries part, the need to, you don't have enough energy even to hide.
Yeah, and actually society's kind of semi-kind about it, or at least to the man, in that I felt for the first time that I was given quite a bit of space to do whatever the fuck I wanted.
There's definitely a difference between what society allows men who have lost their wives or spouses. I'm not sure actually in non, heterosexual relationships. I don't know how that works. So anybody in a non-heterosexual relationship, reach out to me if you are a widower, because it'd be interesting to hear if like the gay world felt the same way. You know what I mean? Like, I actually don't know, but I can tell you that
Great movie plug about that.
Oh God, that was a great movie.
What was the name of that? It's the guy.
It's Daniel Levy's. It was so good. His most recent film.
Great. So his husband gets killed in a car accident, and he has to go through his husband's life that he knew well and loved, but didn't know all of the stuff, and slowly kind of unravel, which that happens. Like, even I was married for 19 years, there was still some of that unraveling the little things that you didn't know about, or that you
well, we're all hiding.
yeah.
That's what we're talking about. So it's Man Month, and we're getting a little off topic, but it's impossible for us to continue potentially down this road without like letting everyone know that we're in a moment where I would say that we're feeling heavy and grateful. The baby's doing amazing.
I think it's very relevant to Man Month. These are situations, particularly this one, that can be very threatening to a man. A medical situation or potential medical situation that is 100% out of my control. And I haven't responded well to some of the things that have come up. I've responded with anger and anxiety, because the truth is I want to go in, I want to fix it, and I want it to be okay. And that's just not necessarily the reality. I think I'm not the only man out there that has the deep desire to fix and to make everything okay quickly.
Right.
In this situation, with 9 months, 9 months total. We don't have 9 months left, but 9 months where there's something happening very much outside of your control. And that can be very stressful. Luckily, Alix and I talk a lot about how she's feeling, which has been really great. And she allows me to tell her how I'm feeling. So I can tell her that I'm really scared. I can actually even be angry, and she can help me realize that I'm really scared, which is great. I was actually thinking the other day, like, what if you didn't know someone well? I'm thinking about a couple who will remain nameless, but
young.
Like, what if you don't know someone well and you run up on anger and fear and all that stuff, and you don't know whether, like, do I ask him to go to therapy with me? We've only been dating 3 or 4 times. He seems, or do you cut and run? I think that's can be a difficult situation. This is kind of semi-related, but when Alix and I first started dating, or talking, really, we weren't even dating, really. We were just talking. She had a little breast mass scare, and
I sound like a hot disaster. That's like medical crisis times 1,000.
This is very common, actually.
Yeah, totally.
Anyway, so we had just started talking, and I had just really liked her, but it was complicated, right? I lived 3 hours away, and I had 3 children, and she had 2 children, which I had never met. And all of our children were having problems, and issues that were very real and very scary. And particularly when you're first starting dating, you don't know, like, how much can you help? How much can you not help? You know what I mean? And I was just learning about my own feelings, so it was sometimes challenging to listen to other people's feelings and put them somewhere, you know? When she was telling about this breast thing, it felt really, I was scared to death. I was scared to death. And I thought, my God, I've just met who I think is the most amazing person that I've ever talked to. And she's going to get breast cancer. And, like, how does that work? I barely know her. You know,
Right.
and like, would I help you walk that walk? Or would I say, you know, call me if you need me? You know what I mean?
Right. Whether to run or not.
Because when you're just learning about someone, now we know each other fairly well. And she knows that when I get angry, 99.9% of the time, I'm scared, right? And vice versa. And then that's extremely helpful. I think that goes back to kind of the foundations of the relationship, that I don't know what you do when you haven't built those foundations yet. Or maybe that's part of building the foundation, is giving somebody the space and time to be scared.
I think it's really important that you understand your own window of tolerance. It's a lot what we talk about in the nervous system healing.
Right.
So when anger becomes toxicity, and you know that internally, when you're connected with how you feel on the inside, that you feel scared. I mean, you don't really have to know much to know that if there's a danger kind of warning happening inside of your body with another person, that's the time to get out. That's the time to potentially not commit to trying to work on it. What I know to be true is that your anger can be sharp sometimes. It's definitely usually surrounding things of a lack of control.
Yeah. Well, actually, I know the answer to my own question, because when that was happening, I still felt like I wanted to talk to you and meet you and be with you. So even though I was scared, I still felt like, even if you died of breast cancer, I still wanted to, it's crazy to say that out loud, I still wanted to be with you. And
well, loss on loss is so insane, right? Like this week, I feel like we're heavy on loss on loss. So to those of you listening out there, you know, I remember when I buried Carl, I thought, this is it. This is the worst thing that could have ever happened to me. And I'm recognizing now that that's not true. Like, it is the worst thing potentially thus far that's happened to me, but that does not mean that when I got the breast scare, which was, you know, a year later, plus, it dawned on me, oh my God, I'm not like immune to getting cancer myself. I have a pretty, you know, long history in my family of breast cancer. And also I'm not immune to more loss, and I'm not immune to my children having major problems. Like, it doesn't mean that it's all uphill from there. People love to say stuff like that, like, well, it can only get better from here. When I'm like, that's not really how life works, right? Life continues on.
It feels, it felt, I still sometimes wait for the next disaster. Like, what's the next thing that we're going to have to overcome, or not overcome, or what's the next thing, you know? And
well, I think people with trauma,
Jan used to call it the waiting for the next foot to fall, you know?
Yeah, well, when you wait for the next shoe to drop, that's a trauma response, right? That's someone who's been through a series of hard things, and it doesn't always seem to go in your favor. And so that's a pattern of PTSD that you have to work out of. It's a long-term work out of it that you have to continue to try to choose hopeful, loving aliveness within your life. And that's what we're doing. And I'll say this, it's not easy. I had a friend of mine who literally lost her husband the day before Father's Day. Her husband is a world-renowned chef and literally was creating the most healthy initiatives in the culinary industry. Literally some of the best food I've ever tasted in my life, are arguably one of the best chefs in the world. and 2 beautiful children. They were so in love, and like everybody who knew them knew how strong of a marriage they had, and how much he was building was just insane. Like Nike sponsoring him, he's running every week. LeBron James and him are opening this restaurant in New York. I mean, Boku store, 11 Madison Park, Nomad. This dude's incredibly talented. And I'm not sure what happened. The autopsy report hasn't been revealed, but the family said like something potentially like, you know, a heart attack or something, just tragic. Super healthy guy. And we had like a decent long talk the last time I was around him about like creating healthy initiatives in the restaurant industry. And I was talking about Carl and his stress and, you know, the long hours and how the industry can breed such unhealthy patterns. What I want to say about this loss, it hit me very, very hard because I was like, it's something about having deep loss within yourself and then seeing it go down with someone you care about. That may even be someone that you care about a little bit distally, right? But you have enough space and time to walk the path like that you see it. And you're like, oh my God, I know not exactly how that person feels, but I know enough about how that person feels and how terrible what they have to go through is right now. And that never goes away. Like you never stop feeling those feelings as a widow. But the resiliency comes from the fact that when you clear the noise out, you may always be afraid that the other shoe is going to drop, as David said. And I am a little bit for this baby in the sense that like, man, so many things could potentially go wrong. But I have full confidence that the baby's going to be fine. We are going to have a hard couple months. It is going to be about as trying as it can get. My friend who just lost her husband has a hell of a fucking road ahead of her. Her and her children do, and their family. But I know she's a tiger. She will put one foot in front of the other and love her children and figure out a way to put her life back together because she's strong. And she's brave, and braveness is not ignoring our feelings. They're feeling our feelings, and she's emotional, and she will work the path. And what I want people to know out there, the thing about Man Month that makes me so impassioned and keep interrupting on the last episode is that if you keep shoving your feelings down as men and women, you keep being so afraid to allow them to show their feelings, whether it's not productive, like anger, you're going to stay stuck. You're going to stay asleep. You will never be able to have the resiliency to feel and to grow and to love. And if you don't love yourself enough to stand up for yourself and say what you need and express what's happening on the inside of who you are, you'll forever be lonely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even to the point and to the extreme examples, it's just hardly a life. You're barely alive.
Well, it's why I call it sleepwalking. It's why I'm sitting in this chair. I mean, to be fair, we have 15 million doctor's appointments tomorrow. I'll probably know how many millions of weeks I'm going to be sitting in a hospital bed, which, I mean, if you think I'm interrupting him too much, listeners, imagine how hard it will be for me to be sitting still in a hospital. Yeah, I'm kind of an energetic person. It's impossible for me to imagine our boys starting high school and me being sitting in a hospital bed that week.
Yeah, and 2 of our kids going to college.
Jack moving in, like Kate moving into her first apartment and me missing all of that. And we had just celebrated Father's Day yesterday, and honestly, it was a really peaceful day. The sadness didn't come until the very end of the night. A little bit from my kids, dysregulation, a hair in the midday, but it was really just hunger. But I've been a little reflective because as we left Father's Day, there was a lot of recent comments that hit my lap about our unworthiness of a couple and like our secondary nature for our love. And I felt like angry, truthfully. Angry that there are people in the world who, and it's actually coming from a patriarchal energy, a male energy, that can't understand us. And it's interesting when I start to think about this for women and for men and for us. It's like when men get stuck in their fear for those they love, and they also are stuck in their own anxiety and can't express and can't just say, like, that's nerve-wracking for me that you guys are going to have another baby.
Yeah, I mean, it comes across, that is going to come across as judgmental and negative. And even when it's got like a nice powder coating on it, it's still basically negative. And it has nothing to do with us or what we're doing.
Well, it's so hurtful.
And it just... It's just the world we live in. You can't get away from the generational changes. I mean,
trauma.
Yeah, you can't get away from it. It just keeps going, and they carry it until you wake up. And actually, then I think you have a chance to shed it and to mold it and change it.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you've never looked at it, which a lot of men in particular never have.
Like how your paternal line, I guess, and maternal line, but we're talking mostly about paternal right now.
Yeah,
how it impacts you.
I actually thought today that we could talk briefly about my paternal history, and I don't think it's that unique. Honestly.
No,
certainly not unique from the middle part of the country. I don't know my great grandfather. I don't know anything about him actually. My grandfather was a very traumatized person. I know now. His mom died early. He was born in 1908, so give you some idea. His mom died when he was young, and it was he and his dad, I think, did everything together, from what I understand. This is kind of like almost preschooling time, He did go to school later, but I think before he really enrolled in school, my great grandfather took him everywhere. He was a mule trader, so they went back and forth from Oklahoma and bought mules and sold mules and blah blah blah. And then when they settled down a little bit and they bought a little farm, he remarried, and he remarried a woman who had a family already, had I think 2 kids. I don't know if she was a widow, but I would guess she probably was. I think she was a widow. And they just didn't get along, that he hated her. And she, I think, saw him as a threat to... This was the story that was passed down, that she saw him as a threat to her family, her new family. And basically kind of shunned him. And
the child?
Yeah, my grandfather.
Okay.
And then apparently his dad, wretched, from my point of view now, I'm sure his dad was just trying to make it work, but going from just the 2 of them to, I think she had 2 or 3 kids, to this larger family. He didn't know anybody. And he just didn't have the skills to adapt to that situation. And he never really recovered from the trauma of losing his mom and then losing his dad.
He must have been devastated to lose his mom, too.
So my grandfather was a very stoic would be the nice word. But the truth is he was mean, he was angry, he was not loving at all. He barely survived the Great Depression. He definitely married my grandmother to survive, no doubt about it. I'm sure they got along, but there was certainly no emotional connection other than dependency.
Did you have an emotional connection with your grandfather?
No. I bet he said 5 words to me my entire life. He wanted nothing to do with Paul and I. He would just sit there and, he was very, and he and my dad didn't get along, even as adults. They just didn't get along. They ignored each other, which is the only way they could be in the same place at the same time. And my dad has told me stories that have just been really remarkable and made an impression upon my dad. For example, my dad played baseball And he was fishing with a friend one day, a family friend, older friend, and said, you know, you're naturally a good baseball player like your dad. And my dad looked at his friend and was like, what are you talking about? And he had my dad played like high school. He was a good baseball player. And my dad had no idea that his dad had ever played baseball. He had never thrown with him, had never gone to a game. Just didn't have any relationship with my dad at all. I actually think that had a big impression upon my dad, and I think that he did, because of that, he recognized that as not good from a father parental point of view.
Swung the other way?
That my dad did really try to correct that, and he was much more involved in my life. Now, he swung kind of the other way and was probably a little too involved, like too involved in every second, every minute, every behavior, everything, you know, my dad was involved with, which was not great.
For you.
Yeah. And, you know, I always, you know, my dad is not a hugger for sure. He's only hugged me maybe a handful of times in my life. And I remember the first time he hugged me, I was 18 when I graduated from high school. It was the first time he ever hugged me. And other than maybe a baby, I assume he held me as a baby. And I 100% know his dad never hugged him. Never. His whole life. I'm sure of that. So my dad did the best he could, but you know, the truth is, if we're on an emotional journey, we're on the rise, you know, and I think men now, to bring it back to the men thing, are in a position where we can better see that generational trauma and neglect and kind of do something about it. Because the truth is, it's not that it doesn't work. I mean, it does work, right? It makes...
The stoicism?
Yeah, it makes men, right? I mean, you're still a man. But you're just missing out on, 90% of people's personalities and people's what they have to offer you, you know? There's tons of stuff that I would love to tell my dad, you know? But mainly like how I feel and what I want. But he can't hear that. He would never listen to that.
Why do you
think? If I told him, I don't think he would hear it.
He's too afraid?
Yeah.
What do you think that, I mean, I get it, but that generation, do you think it's because, I mean, a lot of the baby boomers, they dealt with so much post World War II. Like, I'm wondering...
Between the Great Depression and the loss in World War II...
The grief.
Yeah. There's just a really worldwide grief. And when I think about it, I actually thought about this when Betsy died. I thought about like the trauma, the PTSD that I was feeling and the severe debilitating grief. And I actually thought at the time, because I like war movies like a lot of men, you know? Mm-hmm. And I actually thought, I was like, can you imagine like 90% of the people in your town losing a child? I mean, it's hard to imagine.
Right, it feels so small.
How that would affect your town and then maybe even the state. I mean, I'm sure that there are towns in France that lost 100%. 100% of their children. The adults go on. I mean, that's hard to... That had to have a lasting, severe effect.
Right.
And I think the effect was... And this is a thought you have as a widow, and I thought this as well, that, like, for example, love. I had the thought, I was like, I'm never trying this again. I'm never trying it again, because if I fall in love again and love and put my, you know, heart there and something happened, I would die. Because you feel like you're dying in the grief, you know?
Mm-hmm. You do. Actually, I think it's easier to die than feel the feelings.
Right.
Like, suicide is like a normal thought. Like, people don't understand that, but I'm like, oh, you shouldn't be suicidal. You're like, dying is way easier than feeling all this. Right.
So if that's an individual thought that I had, then that was probably a near societal thought. And I know from the Great Depression, they thought that austerity was the only way to survive. Well, austerity that's not just a financial thing. That's a mentation thing. Austerity is not feeling. You know what I mean? You're hungry, but you don't say you're hungry. You know what I mean?
Right. How do you think that this is translated? So how does generational trauma from your familial line impact you on a day-to-day basis? And how are you working out of it?
I think it's probably the root of my basic anxiety. Definitely from the financial side. I'm sure I got that from them. This feeling that if you're not financially stable, your person is at risk. You know, like you could die. That's a stretch in today's society. Although there are certainly, I don't want to discount the edges of society that are in that situation. That's a really terrible situation to be in. Clearly, we're not in that situation, and most people, probably most of our listeners, are not in that situation. But you can still feel that if you're not financially secure, and that can be like defined in any way, that you may personally die, or that your loved ones will die. And I'm sure that came from that was passed down, for sure.
Anything else?
The anxiety, what other than anxiety?
Not trusting your feelings, I feel like.
Yeah, but that's all kind of related.
Right? Yeah, but can you explain it to the listeners, just because they don't know you well enough to know that financial anxiety isn't your only fear?
Yeah, so I think there was a fear I had for a long time that there was just no place for multiple generations in my family, and probably a lot of families, to share your feelings. And the reason for that probably was a protective mechanism in hard times, right? You wouldn't want to spend energy, or you might not want to spend energy crying about, something somebody said when you're having a potato a day for food. Which is also something we never talk about, like that. That I think, and I don't know how many. I know the generation younger than us don't know anything about it, and I've only heard stories, and it is hard for me to imagine. But it is true that in that period where we came from, where you came from, where I came from, people were starving.
Well, there's a lot of people starving now.
And it wasn't just for a year or 6 months; it was years of starving. And that.
But let's bring it back to you and today. I get. I think the listeners get, and I get. If with that picture you're painting in generational trauma, we understand that if you have a father, my father, who I have no relationship really at this point, I also have forgiven him for abandoning me personally, but I have no relationship with him at all, and he doesn't call. So, but his father came home from war, and there was abuse in my father's home. I feel a lot more free to talk about my father's history on this show because my father and I have no relationship, but I was very aware of the abuse that went down. So my grandfather was a very stand-up guy and actually a very well-known physician. People loved him. But when he came back from World War II, he was suffering from extreme PTSD is all I can imagine. And he took that anger and dysregulation and trauma out on my uncle and my father, not my dad's sister. She never was actually abused in any sort of way, but the boys were abused very severely, and it had great impact on my father. It was both verbal and physical abuse that went on for a long time. And my dad's mom had a stroke at kind of an early age, and I think my grandfather, he loved her very much, was very much in denial as a physician, didn't want to see the truth on that. And so in that, there was, they were from the Midwest, a very stoic farming kind of community. My grandfather was a physician, not a farmer, but he was from a long line of dairy farmers. And so always kept that kind of like, put your head down, hard work, don't talk about feelings. It was very hard for my dad to talk about feelings, but my dad was very empathic. He was a healer, still is to this day, a wonderful physician. He was an emotional person, but it was very hard for him to stand up for himself, to believe in himself, in one capacity, like work. This is very masculine, right? Like, this is where the masculine toxic energy can get, is like, he knew he was good at work, and there he felt strong. But inside, as just an outsider and an outsider now, but an insider growing up in his home, he was insecure. I could see it now. He was worried about being lovable, and it impacted my parents' marriage so much. My parents loved each other very much, like madly in love, actually. Would have had 15 children. They would have just kept having children. But the more children they had, and the older they got, and the harder we got, the more opinions we had, the more, teenagers that popped up with like real life issues, the more dysregulated my parents got, especially my father. And my dad,
Sorry.
It's okay. My dad went from what I imagined to be a zero self-worth. It was like just the dichotomy that we talk a lot about when I talk about the inside and the outside of you being so different, right? So he was growing in wealth and success, and I went to Harvard, very bright. But the inside of him was growing more and more, I think, afraid and insecure. And I think the gap between my parents' marriage was growing and growing, and the coping strategies were failing. He was getting busier, and we were getting harder, all 6 of us. And narcissistic tendencies started to grow. And I think you start to cocoon inward if you're in that masculine energy, and it goes to that far end of toxicity, where you're too scared to say how you feel. You can't ask for help. And it's super interesting to hear about your patriarchal line too. You didn't say narcissism by any means, but it's like when you don't have the coping strategies, and you've never been hugged, and you've been physically abused or mentally abused, emotionally abused, you don't feel good about yourself inside. You're growing in success because financial gain is the only way that you know that you're worthy of something. So you grow and grow and grow in wealth. And I recognize that might be a unique white privilegey kind of path. I don't know if I'm saying that from like a Caucasian point of view. I don't know if all people feel that way. So it'd be interesting to get a more, diverse background and say like, okay, well, how do all men feel? I'm not sure. But from my perspective, that was the way my family went. And the more unhealthy that he got, the more he closed off and couldn't hear. He couldn't feel, he couldn't connect. And the more he was emphatic and pushed away. And I think the more he knew he was going in the wrong direction, or I actually think it was a direction for the self, unhealthily, right? But the direction he needed to go for himself to get out of the marriage or to do what he needed to feel survival, the more he closed off and couldn't admit he did wrong. So that's where it's like, we're not black and white. And I think when you live in that zone, you have to be black and white because you're so unsure of feeling and saying how you feel and expressing it to others and how they may receive that it's all no's or all yeses, and there's no in between, and it's very interesting.
That's, I saw a lot of that growing up, a lot of black and white, a lot of,
sorry,
a lot of right and wrong.
Everything's very dogmatic.
And it disturbs me today when I still hear that, because it's so obviously inconsistent with reality. I've always thought that didn't make a whole lot of sense. It just didn't fit with what you taking in from the environment or other people you meet. It's just not true.
We're so lucky, right, to now be able to have so much support. And I mean, this is one of the positive things about like social media and all of these therapists who are incredible researchers on things like shame and vulnerability and trauma and nervous system healing.
Yeah. Now, saying that, I lived in that world until 4 years ago. I felt very much.
Did you choose that world to be comfortable because you were comfortable in it?
Yeah. I mean, I was super worried that I had to live a certain way for sure.
Well, I just want to know
to be safe,
if you can talk about it and you feel comfortable. I mean, to the degree that you're ready to speak about this. When you talk about, I mean, I'm comfortable talking about my father because I know for sure he's not listening. And if he was, I'm comfortable to say how I feel in front of him at this point in my life. I love him. I forgive him. He was a wonderful father. Actually, to the capacity he was able to love me, he loved me really fully. I now, after, I don't know how many years of therapy, 15 or something of deep therapy, I recognize that he stopped loving me because he didn't love himself enough to believe he was worthy of making his own happiness choices. Mm-hmm. And I was a part of that. I was lumped in, with my mom. He couldn't separate our family from his new family choices. And so
I would say my dad did a better job in that he channeled his I think he channeled his basic drives that he inherited from his parents into a more healthy, and it's a subtlety, okay, but into a slightly more healthy heritage, more in that, for example, like my dad feels strongly in prosperity and success. Like to him, it's his love language. There's no doubt about it. And he made sure that I received that. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty great, honestly. I mean,
he did a lot for you.
People don't do that, and a lot of fathers can't or won't. And he did. Now,
well, he sacrificed a lot to give
right.
you.
That's exactly right. He gave up a lot for my brother and I. And he did give us what he could give us. He just couldn't give us emotional
connection.
But he did give us what he could, which, I mean, that's something, right?
Well, I recently read this week, actually, it was really powerful. It's like one of the most important takeaways from feeling, right, or accepting that you have all this generational trauma or fatherly and motherly generational trauma and wounds from your parents, parental wounds, is that you can put energy in to how you feel and you should walk through it. But a lot of your energy, and this is what we're getting at from this company perspective, is a lot of your energy actually needs to be present to yourself.
Yeah.
Because the truth is that you will never heal someone else.
Yeah.
You will never heal your mother, your father, your grandfather. They have to make the choice to do that. You can boundary. I mean, the best way to take care of yourself is to set some boundaries so that their unhealthiness isn't making you miserable. And whatever that means for you, you can set healthy boundaries to say, in my home, we do this. If we're going to have a relationship, I would appreciate if you didn't do this, and that's hard enough as it is with parents from the generation our parents are from. But at the same time, the energy is better spent on yourself and actually taking a minute to say, what would be.
Well, that's a major difference. I would say my dad's generation and certainly his parents highly valued self-sacrifice, highly valued giving up pretty much everything for your family, your kids, your farm, whatever it was. That was definitely valued. And it's a kind of codependency.
But what about you? So what do you value? I mean, what is that?
I mean, I was about to say, I also actually feel strongly to provide for my kids. I feel a very strong drive to protect my kids, provide for them with their needs. And I'm not even going to say basic needs. I want them to have things that I think they need and that they want. So I definitely feel that, but I also want to give them the emotional part too. I want them to know that I love them. I don't want them to feel safe to tell me that they hate me or that they love me or that whatever they're feeling. And I think that, I don't know, somebody told me once you should when I started studying religion, that you should study all the religions, take what you like from each one and throw away the rest, you know? And sometimes I feel that way about generation. I mean, generational trauma and generational things you inherited, it's not all bad. It's not, in fact, most of it's not intrinsically bad. It just can get to the bad, unhealthy part when, physical violence, beatings happen, and dysregulation happens, and alcoholism and all that stuff because they didn't have the skills to deal with it. And that's what I want to give my kids. I want to give my kids the tools to grow up and be 45 and not be so dysregulated they can't function and they can't get out of the bar or whatever that they're
right. Their coping strategy has to be to check out.
Right.
What do you think, if you're talking not to your children for a moment, but you're talking to a male listener who may or may not have been through any tragedy, but is suffering in their marriage, maybe? I think that's a common one we hear, is like alone in their marriage, hiding or feeling a lot of things inside, but nothing externally with their partner, providing strongly, has that external life that looks like it's great to everyone else, does a lot of guy things, but even they're not necessarily feeling fulfilled, and is sort of like what I imagine a lot of our male listeners, or the husbands of our male listeners, like I think of it as like a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, potentially.
Where it's like, it's fine for now, but there will become a point where if the women continue to not speak their truth and the men continue to not speak their truth.
Yeah.
And this can happen in any relationship, of course.
Right. And I think there is some men and women too have a delayed mentality, that the emotionality we're going to deal with later, that.
What would you say to them? Like, how do they get started if they feel this stuff and they have generational trauma from their father who maybe didn't hug them, and they don't have a model for emotionality, as we've talked about, which is very common. Short
of professional help.
I mean, so step one, you would say, is get a therapist.
I think it's going to be hard to avoid professional help.
I interrupted you at least 15 times because there were so many facts coming in on SEO traffic, and the most searchable topic for men currently in the last month of 2024 was actually men looking up therapists, how to get therapists, how to do therapy online was a really big one for men.
Because it's super complicated. And I think that we're hesitant to look into ourselves. We tend to look externally, and I think that's definitely where alcoholism and all that stuff comes from. And we have to look inside ourselves and figure out our own journey. And the truth is, your partner, there's only so much your partner can do. Your partner can give you the space, right? But at the end, when we say this all the time, we're together, but your journey is alone. You have to make your own emotional path. And that really just requires the man looking in the mirror, which that's a metaphor and a reality. And I did a lot of this. I did a lot after Betsy died of just looking in the mirror, like an actual mirror.
Mirroring work is really powerful.
And I would stare in the mirror, and I would, my first thought when I would look in the mirror was, who am I looking at? Like,
who am I?
Yeah, who am I? I didn't recognize myself. I saw things in my eyes and in my face that I had never seen. And I was starting to allow myself to wonder about who I was, which is something I had never done. I had never really thought about who I was. Like, what are my inner drives?
This is where I feel is an overlap between women and men.
Yeah, I think it's a response to a complicated world. The world is complicated and can feel very chaotic and overwhelming. And one way to deal with that in the short term is to kind of shut it down.
Well, when we talk about sleepwalking, the reason the company is called Wake is, it's like a double, I don't know if a double entendre is the right word, but it's a double meaning. Yeah. Wake meaning like, obviously an allusion to funerals, to being a widow. So the understanding the rebound from loss is what.
But you do know only Catholic people have wakes.
Well, I'm obviously a Reformed Catholic. I'm recovered, for those of you out there who are questioning me.
I had never heard of a wake for a long time. I had no idea what it was. Until I went to South Louisiana.
Yeah. Well, a wake is like, it's just the same thing. It's like a receiving line, and they just call it a different name. But
Right.
regardless, it's also about waking up. It's about not sleepwalking. I mean, one of the most important messages I have to say is like, you need to love yourself enough to wake up. My friend just lost her very healthy husband. He runs marathons on marathons on marathons. Okay, he's a high-producing, literally loved his family, did every fucking thing right. Okay.
Yeah, she's gonna have a lot of choices to make in the next 6 months to a year.
She is, but they lived a very woke life. Like, they lived unapologetically. Like, he was wearing cool, badass Nikes and had Biggie Smalls and was changing culture, and he was living on the edge.
She may be better positioned than I was.
Right. I think we walked in a little asleep in our death walk. And I think what I'm asking the clients and the listeners out there is like, I don't want you to have to be the widow and widower to wake up.
Yeah, but I will say, and this is very masculine, most men will sleepwalk until they absolutely don't have it, until they're forced to not.
Until they've hit a wall?
Until something happens.
Is this why you think a lot of affairs happen?
Absolutely.
Why do affairs happen so much?
Well, I think there's lots of reasons that affairs happen. But I think a big one is that, that's a huge question.
But is it that you feel, so I'm only coming from this from our marriage, and my father had an affair. And so before I met you, I was petrified of affairs and thought they were so wrong because they ruined my family so much. Like, I had and I still have such a deep fear. I think it would be devastating, but I actually know so in my first marriage, I took a full responsibility of always doing all this work to be sexy and make sure there was nothing that I could ever be blamed for. But in reality, looking back now that I know what I know, I was hiding and missing a lot of pieces that actually were 100% could have led to an affair. Mm-hmm. But with you, I think about this a lot. You've taught me that if there's complete isolation and loneliness and a lack of connection and communication, and you try to communicate, I mean, even if it's poor communication, you try to communicate it and the person still can't show up for you. And then the way that men who come from generational trauma, so you're not allowed to say how you feel because you're petrified of that. And you weren't modeled much physicality except for the high five, get it done, get the girl. And something about sex is super promoted in high five. So the way, let me finish my thought before you interrupt, because I know you're going to have a lot of good things to say but the way that you're able to actually be in deep emotion and deep feeling is in sex. And so when there's a disconnect with the physical, and it has to be laced with true connection, I actually think, for most men. They won't say that, right? Women take it as ugh, why are you trying to have sex with me again? You didn't do the dishes. Why are you trying to have sex with me? But again, that's just them continuing to not being able to. We need the verbal affirmation. Men don't get that. But the true act of sex is actually how you guys, that's the only safe emoting you have.
So I think there's a lot of different reasons why people have affairs. I think maybe one of the more common reasons is the coping strategies that have helped stay in a relationship for a long time start to break down. They're no longer working. You're getting disconnected, like you said, but you're stuck, right? You have kids, you have a mortgage, you have a job. You don't want to leave any of that. And this is a really weird thing to say, but you still love the person you're married to.
No, because remember, it's not black and white.
You're just
There's gray.
You're still in love. But I think we all have a strong desire to be loved, and affairs can give you that feeling. I think that's a pretty common, and I was thinking about a friend of mine who was basically in that situation, had a bunch of kids, was stuck, they were disconnected, and she was like, I need more. She was looking for a connection, and he was not willing or able to make that connection, and she's like, and she threatened him, look, if we don't work on this, if you don't go to therapy, then I'm gonna get a divorce. And he looked at her and said, let's get divorced. Almost like he was just waiting for her permission to get divorced.
Yeah, it's so hard. That's like every woman's fear, I guess.
Yeah, so I think some men are literally just waiting around for the person they're disconnected with to tell them, okay, it's time.
And I think we have to be careful in that situation. It's like, okay, most of my friends who are divorced and take some time away from their divorce, they go to therapy because, of course, like, the shattering of the life happens, and they realize, like, I should have never married this person. Like, there's a lot of that, and so.
Right, but I think a lot of men will stay in, and women too, will stay in relationships that they should have never got in for various reasons: momentum, obligation, moral, ethical feelings of. And I use this term loosely, to make it work. We're going to stay together and make it work. And really all that means is you're just staying together. You're not making it work, you're just staying together.
Well, I don't want to interrupt, but do you mind if I circle back to the looking in the mirror? Because I'd like to end on that note. So every problem that we've probably ever talked about in general does come back to the core question. And there's two parts to this. Like, I always find, like, if you're confused about emotions and you're not sure how to feel, at least from my perspective, and I'm a woman, so I can't speak for men, but I know you well enough to know that we have to notice it. We have to name the problem. We have to say, like, something's not right here inside of me.
Yeah.
I name it. I feel blank. Like, what do I feel? And even if you can't say it to the partner yet, journal, I don't care, say it in your head, in your car, say it to someone if you have a safe person. Like, if you don't have a safe person to talk to about any feelings, that might be something to look at. But then how do you attend to the problem? Like, what do I do? And then this mirroring work that you're saying could fix almost anything, because you have to be aware if you're looking in the mirror. When you see yourself, you have to notice yourself. I mean, if you're really doing honest mirroring work, what do I want in this life? And I say this to my coaching clients. This is what I'm working on with. I'm doing some beautiful work with some domestic violence survivors that are just, I mean, these women could run me over. They're fucking powerful, amazing women. And we ask the question, what are you longing for? And that every decision should come from that.
Yeah, it's a really hard question, but it has to be asked. It will be asked.
Huh.
Right? It's going to be asked. For me, it was, who am I? Who am I looking at? Who is this person looking at me in the mirror?
Yeah.
And that shocked me to my core, that I didn't know myself at 46, that I didn't recognize myself, and I could not even put together a story that made the person in the mirror make any sense. Like, I couldn't even say, oh, well, this is the person that went to med school. This is the person that did this and did that. I couldn't even put those pieces together and make it fit the person I was looking at in the mirror. And it was an extremely central, shattering moment.
Amen. So we're getting closer into the male month. I'm going to try to calm down and stop interrupting. My anxiety's high. I'm passionate about what we're doing here. And I always talk too much. I mean, I'm just a
for
talker.
the record, I don't really mind it. The truth is, like, I tend to talk slowly and lightly, and I don't mind the prompting. I actually don't mind the interruptions, because sometimes, like, I'm thinking through in my head and you can just go straight to it, and I'm like, yep, that's pretty much what I was saying. Or no, but it's still,
I can be wrong
it's
too.
a little talking point, and that's fine. I don't mind it that much.
I hear you, YouTube. I will be stopping interrupting. And secondary, let me just say this.
What they're really saying when they're asking you to stop interrupting is, and don't take this the wrong way, they want to hear more from the person that you're interrupting. That's really, they think that person is, and that I'm sure that I have that feeling.
Me too.
In fact, when I listen to myself on these podcasts, I think, oh, I was about to say something really important there, and then I just didn't. So that's really what they're saying, was that they want to give the guest or your or whatever the opportunity to say just a little bit more that they think might be important, that's great, right? That's a really nice thing.
Well, and David has such valuable things to say. He does.
It's just not very many of them.
He just comes in sometimes with no prep, and I do all the prep, and then I have this like to-do list, and I'm trying to hit all these points. This is how women are.
So this is. I see this as a feature, not a detractor at all.
No, I'm going to quiet down.
She's a planner. She's the only person that I know that's born since 1950s, 40s, that still buys paper planners.
I do digital too, but I need both.
That literally nobody looks at. She has all these planners. They're all empty, or they started and then...
That's just ADD.
Nobody pays attention because kids are not going to look at a paper planner, period. I'm really not going to look at it either. So you're really just making it for yourself.
Shout out to Skylight. It's saving my life.
Skylight's amazing.
But I have a paper calendar because for me, I have so many things on my day to day. I sold my former company. I have another company.
It helps keep you organized, which is great. But I feel comfortable kind of just showing up a little bit.
He's a wing it, and it stresses me out. And then I'm like, we have to talk about these certain things. It's important to the men to know. And he's more emphatic about the men knowing than me, but then he's chill. So maybe that's just a man thing. I don't know.
I don't like to have things planned out.
Spontaneity.
Yeah. We could talk about sex if you want to talk about sex.
I'm not a pencil to sex in kind of person. I'm just saying, but I might become one in my 50s.
A time planned out, because it feels like you're doing it because it was on the schedule. And I want you to do it because you want to do it.
Yeah. Sex or the podcast?
Everything. But
we're definitely here because we want. I mean, just a reminder to those listening, podcast is not like you don't get paid for this. We do this every week because we love it.
Asking me why are we doing this podcast? I do feel strongly that what we're doing is important. Even if it's not important to the masses, it's important to us. I feel so much better after we talk. In this setting, for whatever reason, it's a safe setting for us to kind of explore each other's emotions and for me to tell you how I feel. It's great. I love it. And I hope, if we're doing nothing else, I think that's what we should be modeling to.
Right. Like take 1 hour a week. I mean, it's actually multiple hours, but take 1 hour a week to like sit down and maybe like round table on a discussion without your cell phone and like.
Right. And it could be just a family dinner, or it could be therapy, or it could be right before you go to sleep.
Yep.
Or because I felt.
Carl used to always say, date your wife.
I struggled with that in my first marriage. We would often just go to bed. We would not really talk about how the day was or what your thoughts were or your plans, or certainly not your emotions. We would just go to sleep.
Yeah.
And when I say we, she would just pass out.
Poor Betsy. She was probably exhausted.
She was exhausted. She was totally exhausted. She didn't leave any space for the rest.
Yeah.
Which is a mistake. That when you get one shot at this deal.
Life.
Yeah.
That's definitely been the theme of the week. So, sending prayers out to Kelly Kent and her family. If you guys are in the New York area, prayers, wishes, and go eat at Saga. Go eat at Crown Chai. I mean, they're just phenomenal. The whole team's incredible. Car and I actually did our culinary adventure for his birthday there, and they let him come downstairs and plate food and do so many amazing things. I've had like 4 or 5 amazing meals there. Crown Chai too. So support the family in any way you can. And I just want to say that we're on a journey that's going to be challenging. And rather than hide from it, I think I'm probably going to talk about it a little bit more. And I'll give you guys updates from the hospital, from the NICU. I mean, there's so many people going through this. And
the podcast from the hospital.
I'm going to be stuck in the hospital for 4 weeks, so we will be podcasting from the hospital. Which
We do need to talk about hospital trauma. That's a whole podcast.
Hospital trauma is another podcast.
That's something we share.
Yeah, I think most people feel trauma from the hospital. Most people aren't going to the hospital for good reasons, except for babies.
Some people, yeah. I think some people do have positive experiences there.
Just babies, that maybe a healthy baby at that.
Yeah.
And there's a big portion of us who may have a little hiccup in their birth plan and their delivery and all the things. And as you remember, Jamie, my original co-host, she had a long NICU stay, and she's been very helpful to kind of guide me on what's to come. And so thank you, everyone, for dealing with my interrupting nature. And when my anxiety strikes, I talk more. So I'm going to calm down a little bit and give David more space and our guests more space. And keep following us for Man Month. We've got one more podcast, and then the week following, we're doing a roundtable. David will be in charge. I will be off, not even on this podcast, and you'll see David fully prepared and in charge. So
Probably not.
with not interrupting guests. So
It'll be fine.
thank you, YouTube listeners. It really feels good when you get harder feedback, because the truth is, like, yeah, I need that. Thank you. Keep the kind and the mean comments coming. I can handle both. I actually am a business owner and get critical feedback from my 5 children every single day, all day long. So I'm pretty good at it, actually. So thank you. I will slow down. You're right.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah. Happy Man Month.
This has been Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alix and David Long. Be sure to check out other episodes where our community of experts share tools and ideas to help you wake to the life inside of you. If you enjoyed this episode of Wake the F Up, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Wake community by downloading our app. Just search for The Wake Wellness in the Apple or Android App Store. And follow us on Instagram at The Wake Wellness. Thanks for listening.